I had a ticket to The Shining. I didn't go. And the next day, I see this news drop. After that screening of The Shining, somebody gets up and goes, hey, we have a special sneak preview of a new movie. And Paul Thomas Anderson shows up, goes, roll it. One of my great regrets.
Welcome to the American Cinematheque podcast, the show where guests program the film festival of their lives. Joining us today is a filmmaker. He's made Cam, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, and in theaters now, Faces of Death. Programming the Daniel Goldhaber Film Festival, it's Daniel Goldhaber.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. So good to be here.
Welcome. For us to understand who you are, we like to start with asking you, what is your movie theater ritual? When you go to see a movie, what is the thing that you do?
Generally speaking, if I can, I really like sitting like about, I don't know, maybe a third halfway back, all the way on the left side of the cinema. And it's weirdly because I went to college at Harvard and I spent like 4 years, going to the Harvard Film Archive 3 or 4 times a week. And the Harvard Film Archive screen is raked a little bit. So there's only like a cluster of like perfect seats in the house, and like I would just always go in and sit in these like little seats on the left side. I saw like 200 300 movies there like that like totally shaped my world of film. And now there's something like it just feels right if I'm like in that part of the cinema. So I do that, and I'm a popcorn person.
Yeah.
I want to get a big thing of popcorn and, generally speaking, finish it in the first 4 minutes of the movie, and then spend the rest of the time wishing that I had more popcorn.
And do you go show up early?
It depends, but I like if I'm going to a multiplex, I like being there for the trailers.
Mm-hmm. And so you grew up. Where did you grow up again?
Boulder, Colorado.
Boulder, Colorado. And was there a lot of cinema in Boulder, Colorado, or what was your first kind of experience?
For me, it was really like my parents were big movie lovers. Their first date was to Citizen Kane.
Oh, wow.
They were more always on kind of like the European art house. They weren't huge genre people. They love like a good heist movie or something like that. We just watched a ton of movies at home. We'd go to the film, to the movie theater a lot. There was some repertory screening in Boulder, but my parents didn't really do that. Like the rep screenings were at the home. Mm-hmm. And there was an amazing video store in Boulder called the Video Station that at the time was the largest collection of movies on like the western,
wow.
I think the middle of the country. It, had like, 300,000 titles or something. It was crazy. And so we would go to the Video Station, once, twice a week, get movies, watch them Friday and Saturday. And, and this was, kind of late 90s, early 2000s, lots of different global cinema.
How were they curated at the time? They would go by directors or genres, or what was the...
No, they were never particularly like film,
mm-hmm.
they knew directors and genres, but usually it would just be like, oh, that looks interesting. And like, it's honestly like one of the things I miss the most about that era of movie going is you ask the guy at the rental store, like, what's good? Mm-hmm. And so for me, the kind of like defining moment in my life, I'd always loved movies, but I'd seen a trailer for this film, The City of Lost Children, before on a DVD of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I had never seen anything that looked anything remotely like. I was like, this is so cool. So I went to the video store, and there was this guy named Stephen DeFore, who I've tried to track down and been totally unable to get this guy. But my parents, asked him, like, the movie's R, is it good? I was like 10 or something. And he's like, it's fine. Like, it's like, show it to him, it's going to be fine. So we watched this movie, and it just like blew my mind. I thought it was the most extraordinary thing I'd ever seen.
And how old were you at this time?
10, 11, somewhere in that range. Yeah. And that was the first time I was like, how did this exist? I went on IMDb. That was my first real time on IMDb. I was like, Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who's this guy? And started digging into the movie. And then I was like, I got to go watch everything that he's made. You know what I mean? And then we started going back and asking this guy, Steve, for movie recommendations. And then Steve was the one who was like, well, you should watch Kurosawa. You should watch Kubrick. You should watch, this and that. And he introduced me to, I think, kind of, and I did. I went and watched every Akira Kurosawa film, and mm-hmm. I was like 11, and he really got me started on compulsive movie watching.
And it's such a visual film. I mean, as a kid, do you remember just like, is that what you responded to? Was it the story? Was it the visual?
Just the world.
Yeah.
I love a like really complex plot where like lots of stuff goes on. And what I love about The City of Lost Children, like, you watch it today, and I still think that like if you try to get that movie made today, people will be like, there's too much going on. There's too many little like worlds and sex and subcultures. And I'm like, I don't know. It's a really special movie, and I think it holds up unbelievably well. Just the specificity of that world, I've still never seen anything like it.
I think at that age also you love being introduced to worlds that have exact rules and different like sex and different things that you have to peel away, right?
And but also like what I love so much about it is that the different worlds of that movie, like they have like really specific narrative purpose that's paired with a very specific political idea that's paired with like a totally outlandish kind of like concept, you know, and you know, just like the brain and the tank and the like, you know, army of like Cyclops, mecha men that live underground, and it is such an epic scope, and it's an expensive movie, but it wasn't like, you know, this crazy thing. I think it's really, really something else.
When I was a kid, all we had was Kroll as a Cyclops.
Yeah,
that was your Cyclops. All right, let's get to why we are here. Behind you is a marquee with 8 different showtimes. You're going to program your festival based on your formative and favorite movie-going experiences. We have opening night, family matinee, midnight movie, secret screening, double feature, audience award, dream screening, and closing night. Nothing is locked in, so if you want to change your mind halfway through, move things around, it's up to you. There are no rules.
Perfect.
Would you like to play City of Lost Children up on this board?
I think that's opening night. That's like the movie that made me want to be a movie maker.
Opening night, City of Lost Children. All right, we have opening night program, City of Lost Children. Last night we had an incredible screening at the Cinematheque of Faces of Death in 35 millimeter. Do you enjoy going to the cinema to see things shot in 35, projected in 35? Or?
Oh yeah, you know, and I'll definitely go out of my way to see a print if I can. And I've been pretty dogged about getting proper prints made of the movies that I've made. So I have a How to Blow Up a Pipeline print sitting in my office at home. I'm working on getting a print of Cam made. It's on the way. Hopefully we can do something with it with you guys once I have it, which is actually, you know, especially with these movies that I make that are kind of about the internet and about, you know, this kind of like, we have these images that we're so used to seeing on a phone, and when I think you recontextualize them, not just in a movie, but in the cinema, on the big screen, I think it's a really special experience for the audience, because you're forcing the audience and the viewer to kind of just consider this digital world that we live in a totally new way. And I think it's very powerful, you know, and I even just saw, like, even with Cam, like the people that saw that movie in a theater, I think always had a different relationship to it than everyone who saw it on Netflix. For me, I think that's a really important thing. It's also hard. Like, you make a movie, you spend 3 years of your life doing it, and then like you can't hold it in your hands. Sometimes it feels like, did I make anything? Does this thing actually exist? But what I would actually say in terms of movies about the internet projected on film is when it comes to that, a very important movie and screening for me. So this good friend of mine named John Derringer, he runs an amazing publication in New York called Screen Slate, which has, I think, been like one of the most important community building tools for cinephilia in the last 20 years. And John programmed an incredible, Screen Slate, check it out. If you live in New York, if you're in the New York area, also San Francisco.
Even if you're not in New York, it's good to read.
It's good. They got, you know, but it publishes all the screen times of kind of repertory cinema in New York, as well as a lot of criticism. Yeah. But it's incredible. But John programmed a film series at Anthology Film Archive back in 2015 when I was working on Cam, that was essentially, I'm now forgetting, I had a great title, but it was essentially like, you know, looking at movies that are about screens projected on film and only projected on film. So, you know, everything from like Videodrome, Lawnmower Man, stuff like that. But he dug up a print of Unfriended that Universal had made and screened it. And I went and saw it, and I was like, whoa, the combination of these textures is like something I've never seen before. And it really made me take digital textures on, in a movie very, very seriously. And it was that screening that like essentially where all of the ideas for really my style when I'm working with internet content like sprung from. So we'll call that a good midnight movie.
All right, Unfriended? Unfriended on 35?
On 35.
Midnight movie.
At the Anthology Film Archive.
Oh, nice. All right, we have Unfriended as the midnight movie. I want to get a little bit more into this concept because I feel like a lot of filmmakers, maybe when they see us on their phones, they view it as like an uncanny valley, like we like live in it now, and they kind of try to, a lot of filmmakers have been doing period pieces and trying to shy away from it. You're embracing it and going full force. We're diving into this. And you're saying that by showing it in 35, it's contextualizing it in a human gaze?
I think it's like this. It's that you're used to seeing an image on your phone. Now you're seeing it 100 times the size, whatever the scale is, on a big screen with an audience full of people. It's a completely different relationship to that image. Yeah. And I think that like by forcing you to like build a different kind of relationship, you start thinking like, ooh, what is happening on my device?
You shot this in, what was the aspect ratio for this film?
2:2, I believe.
Is that your favorite aspect ratio?
It's become my favorite aspect ratio after having worked with it. My cinematographer, Isaac Bauman, on Faces of Death is like super passionate about 2:2 because you get the same kind of like general feeling of like scope and breadth. And this is a big Hollywood movie that you get with like 239, but you just get a little more on the top and bottom. And so I think for the viewer, it kind of situates them still in that kind of epic big movie scope, but there's a sense of kind of like even more like scope or heft to the image. And there's and 2:2's making a bit of a comeback. Like I believe it's what Jordan Peele shot in Open, but it's like what Kubrick loved it. 2001 is in 2:2. I also just like really love what it does to the way that you can shoot like. I love a big close-up. Like if I'm going to do a close-up, it's going to be like, this. And I think that, it just lets you get a little bit more of the head in frame. And I find that it really makes for some special images.
What are some films that you've gone and see that you love the close-up of?
I mean, A Woman Under the Influence is, I think that was when I was younger, like kind of, I saw a lot of Cassavetes. And again, I had this access through the Harvard Film Archive when I was a senior, when I was working on my thesis film. They would let us pull movies out of the archive and screen them on 35 millimeter at the cinema during the day.
It's amazing.
It was unbelievable. Shout out to Hayden Guest, who was my thesis advisor, and let me and my editor, Dan Garber, who I almost always work with, we were doing that together. So we saw a print of A Woman Under the Influence. And I think the way that Cassavetes works with close-ups and, because with Cassavetes, there's so much improvisation to the performance. You have to actually design a formal technique to kind of capture all of the performance and then be able to cut everything together. And I think the way, that he shoots close-ups and that he kind of like does that in a way that gives the actor a lot of freedom actually is really incredible.
So you were in Boulder, Colorado. Where did you go to next? Or was there any other experiences in Boulder that like changed you, or was your next move really?
In terms of movie experiences, this is just an all-time favorite screening that I've been to is when I was 16. I went to the midnight and 3 a.m. IMAX screenings of The Dark Knight were sold out. So I stayed up all night and went to a 6 a.m. screening of The Dark Knight in IMAX. It was my first time, seeing a movie in an IMAX theater. And I was so excited for that film, and it did not disappoint. It was just one of the most electric, I think, experiences that I've ever been a part of. I think people forget how generational that movie felt when it came out. I love Chris Nolan. I really think that he's the greatest filmmaker of his generation. Like, I think I just like love his movies. Like, I love watching them. I think they're great. And I think that there was something about seeing The Dark Knight and seeing that kind of like epic scope while it still felt so real and grounded. It felt like an impossible achievement.
Were you by yourself?
I was with some people. I was with some friends. Yeah, we stayed up all night and went and watched it.
And that was was your first IMAX experience at that point?
I think I'd maybe seen like Everest.
Yeah.
But it was obviously, it was all of our first narrative movie IMAX experiences, because the first time anyone had done that.
And you can kind of see it it resonates in your work, that film, a little bit, of like some crime and some competency and all of these things.
And it's funny because, growing up, I think I was really borrowing a lot of that from Nolan. I was really inspired by Nolan, by, the way he does process, by his big ideas. And again, I think I've found myself more drawn to kind of like digging into political ideas and stuff like that, whereas he's more interested in, I think, abstract stuff, physics. But ultimately, this idea of, how do I use entertainment to talk about, something huge, I think is something that Chris Nolan really, I think, made feel possible for American commercial cinema. For a while, it didn't feel as feasible, but I think he's like, wait, no, there's a demand for stuff that's like smart and good and interesting. And as I've grown up, I've realized that like he was just taking that from Michael Mann and figuring out how to make the canvas even more big and more epic, but you go back, and even back to Thief, you're kind of like, okay, he was maybe at the very forefront of kind of these like, these Hollywood process, big Hollywood process movies, entertainment movies that, so yeah, but Dark Knight, I would say, was a real...
And how long was the gap between Dark Knight and Thief when you watched those?
Thief I didn't watch until, I'd say, 2017. For the first time. My introduction to Thief was going into the Safdie's inspirations for Good Time, which was a movie that also I'd say was huge for me, which I think is extremely evident in my work. But I was like, how did they get this, together? And I hadn't heard of Thief. For some reason, it had not really been on my radar. And I feel like actually the way that they talked about Thief, there was something that helped as a comeback for that movie, because I think after it, I started hearing a lot more about it. But that was kind of watching Thief for really actually the second time for my pipeline research was really what got me like fully Michael Mann pilled.
And that's a lot of the intricacies of putting the bombs.
Yeah, exactly. Like this thing of like, how can you make process like an action sequence?
Yeah.
Why are we interested? And like, now it's like we talk about it like it's competency porn, but it's something that I think a lot of filmmakers think that audiences don't care about, like something being totally believable, or like you really think like, okay, that's actually how you break into a safe. And it all has to do with the suspension of disbelief that you build with your audience. If you're making a movie in which the audience kind of is like, yeah, I know that none of it, I know it's a movie, so it's okay. That's totally acceptable. But then they're always sitting back and kind of like experiencing it as a work of fiction. And I think that when you're able to build a contract with the audience that's requiring less of a suspension of disbelief, where they're really believing that there's something more real going on the screen, I think it heightens the experience that much more. And you see that again in the Nolan movies, in Michael Mann movies, in Safdie movies, where this feeling that this is firmly rooted to our actual world really lets them it just for me makes the experience that much more electric.
And so we've got The Dark Knight.
Yeah, I would think that's probably the audience award.
What was the audience like? Was everyone?
It's just huge. The two screenings that I felt the most audience kind of like, rah, in terms of like how I would love a movie of mine to be received, was that 6 a.m. screening of The Dark Knight and seeing the premiere of Whiplash at the New York Film Festival. So I know Damien a little bit. Me and Dan Garber actually PA'd on the Whiplash short film.
Oh, wow.
Because Damien also went through our program at Harvard and, had come back and talked and watched me and Dan's shorts and had liked them, and we'd gotten lunch a couple of times. And so Damien invited us to the New York premiere, and I really didn't know what to expect. I've never seen an audience explode in the way that people like lost their minds at the end of that movie. It's Aleph Tully Hall. It's like 1,200 people.
Wow.
And, there was all of this buzz and anticipation, but nobody had seen it on the East Coast yet. And it just was like, boom. And I haven't walked out of a screening buzzing, I think, in the way that I was buzzing and inspired, because it was somebody I knew. I knew Damien. I worked on it a little bit. It felt so tangible. And I think that movie's amazing. Yes. I love that film. It's just so fun. But I walked out of that movie being like, if I can ever make a crowd feel like that, I'll feel like I have won.
Yeah. And so the audience award, would you like to make it a double feature? You could do a 6 a.m. and then stick around the whole day for Whiplash?
I think audience award I'll give to Whiplash. Okay. Wait, maybe double feature. Why not?
Do you want to start at 6 a.m. or do you want to end at 6 a.m.?
You know what? Audience award, let's give to Whiplash, because I think it's the audience one, and I'm going to think of something else to pair with The Dark Knight for a really great kind of like, this is the best of Hollywood double feature.
Excellent. So the audience award, Whiplash at the New York Film Festival?
At the New York Film Festival.
New York Film Festival.
And also in terms of Cam and in terms of where the visual language of Cam came from, Whiplash was another movie that we were looking at a lot, because there was this, I think, also question that Damien had to answer, which was, how do you make like jazz drumming exciting? How do you make, you know what I mean? Like, how do you make that feel like action? Yeah. And we had a very similar problem that we were trying to solve with Cam, which was like, how do you make camming feel like action? It's like just somebody sitting talking, and just like looking at the way that he was like using close-ups and rhythmic cutting and all of that, and would kind of get the audience to understand something like that's fairly, abstract. I thought was very exciting. And
I notice you sometimes shoot from behind. It's almost like a first person, which I feel kind of gets you into the character when you're is that part of this, when you have all the devices and things to intentionally shooting from behind the person as they move?
I mean, no, it's definitely, that is about bringing the audience into the character's experience. And it's funny because I can tell you exactly the movie that was watching The Wrestler in, I think, 2007, I want to say.
Think it was, yeah.
That was the first time that I saw a movie that kind of did that, right? And obviously, watching that ended up being my, hearing Aronofsky talking about his influences ended up being my entree into, the Dardenne brothers. And I think that entire strain of kind of European art house cinema that he was borrowing from for The Wrestler. But The Wrestler, and like those opening shots where you're just kind of like with Mickey Rourke walking around, existing in his life. I'd never really seen anything like that before. I was still quite young. I think I was, like 16 or something. And most of my diet and things that I was exploring when I was younger too were informed by like the IMDb top 250 movies, so it was a lot of that kind of diet of American, studio genre cinema. And then I think The Wrestler in particular was a movie that got me more interested in European art house.
All right, let's go back to Harvard. Yeah. When you were there, is there any screenings there? I mean, it's one of the greatest archives there. Was there any screenings there that you remember forever?
100%. There's one in particular, which was, are you familiar with the French filmmaker Philippe Grandrieux?
Yeah.
So Philippe was my thesis advisor, which is very funny because I think nobody would ever be like, the biggest impact on me as a filmmaker is Philippe. But Philippe is like 100%, like he really helped me, I think, get in touch with myself as an artist, and him and then my film professor Rob Moss at Harvard were like my two, and Hayden, who ran the archive. Those were the people that really shaped me as a young filmmaker completely. But Philippe, has very, very kind of esoteric taste in movies. He doesn't necessarily go for big commercial stuff so much. And so there was a lot of reference points that he had as a filmmaker that he wanted me and Dan to understand that I just was the movies I hadn't seen, and a big one was Bellatar. And so we pulled a print of the Werkmeister harmonies and we screened it at like 11 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and it was me, Dan Garber, and Carson Lund, who directed Ephes, who was also around Boston at that time. And I had gotten super drunk the night before, and I was super hungover, and I was like, I cannot watch a like piece of slow cinema right now. Like I was just ready to have like the most miserable 2.5 hours of my life. And I sit down and the movie starts, and I have never been more inside of a film my like entire life. It totally changed what I thought a movie could be, what I thought slowness in a movie could be. It's like that movie's an action film on some level, but it didn't feel like, it just was really something else. And that was another one I walked out of, and I kind of felt like my understanding of what cinema could possibly be had totally transformed. And this is another thing that, has been extremely evident in my work and my approach to filmmaking is one of the other things that had always struck me at the beginning of Werkmeister Harmonies is he credits the movie to himself and his co-director, editor, wife, and, the screenwriter and the cinematographer. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. And I found it especially so interesting because Béla Tarr has one of the most iconoclastic and specific styles as a director of anyone. And yet he's saying, no, this movie belongs to this collective of people that made it. I thought that was so interesting because it felt like it just flew in the face of everything that we're told to think about film authorship. Just kind of considering that and thinking about that and learning more about Béla Tarr really shaped a lot of my approach to collaboration and to kind of thinking about, again, authorship in film. I think it also, it was when I started understanding the ways that not just like oneers work, but the ways that you can link shots in a setup without cutting and what that can do for you. And I mean, obviously the master of that in commercial filmmaking is Steven Spielberg, right? Like the guy is just like the genius of staging. But what I think is really beneficial about watching Béla Tarr movies is that the staging is just as good as a Steven Spielberg movie, but it's happening at a fourth the speed, so you can actually pay attention to how he's doing it. Like it's actually it's a lot easier. It's much easier to learn from a Béla Tarr movie than from a Spielberg movie because from Spielberg you're just caught up in the action. And you get caught up in the story. Béla Tarr, you can really think about how and why he's linking these shots together.
It's like 39 shots in that film.
It's something like that.
But
that's one of the all-time. That's one of. So I'd put that in secret screening because it was a secret, private little screening for just me and my friends. And it's funny. I used to go to the Harvard Film Archive with Carson when we were just kids in college, and then all of a sudden I met his movie at Cannes, and I'm so proud of him. He's such an amazing filmmaker.
Film. Ephes was really. Outdid what people thought that film would do. It's very great film, Ephes. So we're going to put Werkmeister Harmonies under secret screening?
Yes, sir.
Great. All right, we're back. We have four of the titles program. We got City of Lost Children, Unfriended, Whiplash, and Werkmeister Harmonies. You mentioned two people who had Bleak Week at the Cinematheque in retrospectives, in Philippe and Béla Tarr, both there. So we have four. We've still mentioned some things. We mentioned Cassavetes. We've mentioned Dark Knight. We've mentioned some others. Is anything else going to go up on this board from that group?
No, I don't think so. Although, can I do a second midnight movie?
Yeah.
Because I think that there's another one for me that would need to be there, which is Eraserhead, which is also in many ways the ultimate midnight movie, and probably it's not really a conventional horror film, but I think Eraserhead is also top 10 for me, but just, a movie I saw when I was very young, and David Lynch has always been super important to me. And I think what I love about David Lynch is that the reasons he's important to me have also changed over time, because I think that there's a lot of aesthetic things about his movies that are obviously extraordinary, and the cultural impact and just the pleasure of watching them. But what I think is so special about Eraserhead is that was a movie fundamentally made by a collective. And they all owned a piece of the movie, and in the success of that film, the entire cast and crew benefited from it. And I think there's something to me that's so special about how singular that vision is, but also the kind of benefit of like what you can do when you make a movie with your friends that you really believe in, and how important the kind of like global ownership of that movie is for that community, and the way that so many of the people that he did make that movie with ultimately continued to rise up with him as he built a career, I think is something that I take a lot of inspiration from. And I think that it's also just, I think it's so rare that someone is able to make a movie that simply seems like it comes from another world, and that it completely, you know, changes our understanding of what a movie is, while being something that is, you know, just an unbelievable series of images. So Eraserhead is another movie that I think we can, you know, Unfriended can go on at 10 p.m. and Eraserhead gets to be the full midnight
Well, we
movie.
could have 2 screens running at the same time, because they're both going to be sold out, so you can go to the other.
Exactly.
All right, we got Eraserhead joining Unfriended as the midnight movie. All right, we have another film added. We've got the opening night, midnight movie, secret screening, and audience award taken care of. Anything else you need to put up on this board before we move on?
I think Family Matinee, we should do the 6 a.m. screening of The Dark Knight. I think that actually is the ultimate, you know, the earliest matinee of all time. But that feels like that's kind of where it belongs.
Is it the only movie you've ever seen at 6 a.m.?
Probably.
All right.
I did 3 a.m. for The Dark Knight Rises. But yeah.
This is your 6 a.m. slot.
Yeah.
All right, Dark Knight is making the board, making a comeback at Family Matinee. So, all right, we've added The Dark Knight. So we have The City of Lost Children, The Dark Knight, Unfriended, Eraserhead, Workmeister Harmonies, and Whiplash. What is the greatest city to see a movie in? Do you have a favorite?
I'd say New York. You know, it's partially because I think that, like, I feel like every filmmaker has a period between when they're like 22 and 26 where they just want to be a filmmaker, but it doesn't make any sense how to get there, and they just spend 4 years just like watching 300 movies a year while foregoing any other like social contact. And then that kind of becomes this like fundamental bedrock of you as a filmmaker. And I think that for me, I just spent that time in New York, and, you know, the F train in New York will take you from, you know, BAM and Alamo Draft House to now Metrograph and Anthology Film Archive to IFC Center and Film Forum, all the way up to, you know, the Union Square Regal. You keep going, you get to, you know, film at Lincoln Center. I mean, like, come on. That's insane. That's, you know, and you have so many incredible repertory, you know, cinemas, programmers, people that are constantly pushing the boundaries of what we like, what's embraced critically. Oh, and the Roxy is right on that line too. And so, and in part also because John was doing this amazing work with Screenslate, you know, I benefited from that so tremendously. And I got to see so many movies, you know, that you just don't get to see in a movie theater. Everything from Out One to, you know, Histoire du Cinema, you know, some of these like huge, you know, just endurance tests of movie watching. It's kind of just what shaped really the depth of my taste as a filmmaker. And it was also during such an exciting time for New York film. You know, it was when kind of, you know, you had sensory ethnography doing its thing. You had, you know, Alex Ross Perry and Sean Price Williams and the Safdies and this whole Brooklyn movement happening. And it was a very, very exciting time to be in the city. I was totally on the outside of any community. Like, I was by myself. I didn't know anybody, but like I met Micah Gottlieb, who now runs, you know,
He's at the Quad?
Mezzanine. No, he was at the Quad.
Yeah.
This was even before the Quad.
Wow.
I met Micah at a screening of Out One,
Nice.
you know, just like smoking cigarettes outside. and then he moved to the Quad, and then he ended up, now he's running Mezzanine, the LA Festival of Movies, and it's like extraordinary. But, you know, we were all around each other at that time. But that was really, really special.
They all have different identities. Was there one that you went to the most, or was there one that shaped you?
It depends. I'd say, like, when I was younger, I went to BAM a lot. And it's in part, there was a programmer who was programming BAM during that kind of heyday named Nellie Killian, who is a genius. And a lot of Nellie's programming as well really shaped I think, the way I thought about film. Nelly in particular had a really unbelievable lineup called Turkeys on Thanksgiving, which is one of the most brilliant programming selections I've ever seen in my life. And what it was infamous Hollywood flops that are actual masterpieces on Thanksgiving. So it was Showgirls, One from the Heart, Heaven's Gate. I think Speed Racer was in there. Ishtar, yeah. 1941. These movies that you go, because also 1941, insane. Seeing Spielberg make like a sex comedy, it's like you're like, whoa. Yeah. You see this like different filmmaker he could have become had that movie not been a flop. Very interesting. I think New York was in it. Like these big kind of messy, funky masterpieces, and I think that. Growing up, I think I always really wanted to be taken seriously as a filmmaker, and I would always turn up my nose at anything that I felt like had too bad of a critical response. Oh, there's no way Showgirls is good. Oh, there's no way that some of these disasters actually work. Ishtar, and then you go watch them. You watch them in a theater. You watch them with somebody saying, "Hey, hang on a second. There's actually something really special here." And that screening of Showgirls totally changed me. Showgirls and Speed Racer. That's actually maybe the ideal double feature for me.
So what was that about seeing those with an audience? The energy the audience is bringing, you're all accepting something together? Was it the scope of the films?
I think it's like, it's seeing them with an audience, I think, recontextualizes it. But sometimes I think that you need permission. To know that something's good. You need permission that it's like, this has been kind of critically panned, but it's there's something really special here. And and I think also like there's something I think with both those movies, with Speed Racer and Showgirls, where it's like they're really campy when it comes to tone. They're really, they're really colorful. They're really gay in a certain way. And yet, like, they're also like two of the biggest and best critiques of like, capitalism in media, big corporate culture. Like they're these like incisive, attacks on America. And on some level, like they only work without being preachy because they're so campy, because they're so broad, because they're so silly, and because they're such kind of great classic stories.
It's the people who made Matrix and RoboCop.
Yeah,
so, I mean.
exactly. But I think both those movies in different ways really changed the way I thought about tone, made me embrace kind of camp and broadness, I think, in my work more, because, and it's still something that I think critics struggle with. I think, you see kind of a broad, unserious performance in a movie and people go, that's bad acting. And it's like, no. Maybe there's something going on here. Maybe there's a reason this performance is pitched at a certain level. And I think I've tried to kind of keep in mind the both the approach that the Verhoeven and the Wachowskis have to performance, because I enjoy watching it. I enjoy watching an actor be kind of big and fun and campy. It's like, that's entertainment to me.
It's risky too. They're taking a risk.
Exactly.
1941 taught me my first swear word, so.
I love that.
Here's the 1941. All right, so we've got the double feature. Which order are we putting up on the board?
I think you got to do Showgirls, then Speed Racer, because I just saw Speed Racer, by the way, projected in the cinema in 4K for the 4K restoration.
Music Box.
Beyond Fest at Music Box, 2 days before Faces of Death premiered. You're exhausted after that movie. You're just wiped. Yeah.
All right, so we're going Showgirls, Speed Racer.
Yes, sir.
All right, we now have 6 of the 8 showtime slotted here. You mentioned the Music Box. You had your premiere. Was there a favorite screening ever of any of the films, or something that was so important of one of your own personal films that you will remember?
There's a few. Yeah. I mean, I think like premiering Cam was so intense. Like, because I've wanted to be a filmmaker since I was 10, and I made that movie with, one of my best friends growing up, Issa, and and we were just kind of kids from Boulder, and we made a pretty crazy movie, and and actually, it's very funny because it very randomly happened that Timur Bekmambetov, who produced Unfriended and kind of has been a pioneer in the screen life genre, happened to be at our premiere at Fantasia, and that felt so strange. And I just remember like Issa and I watching the first cut of Cam. It'd been very hard with Cam. We got rejected from everywhere. We got rejected from Sundance twice, from South by, from Tribeca, Cannes, Venice, Berlin, Toronto, Locarno, like every major film festival said no thank you.
Wow.
And then, the movie had been made with a backstop with Netflix. And, after we got rejected from all the A-tier festivals, Blum said sorry and triggered the backstop, and Netflix took the movie. And then we got into Fantasia. Mitch over there championed it. He's amazing. We convinced Netflix to let us play. But again, the movie was just going to be an output deal on Netflix, up on the platform, 7 years, just part of the content stream. And then we played Fantasia, and we got amazing reviews, and we got this rave in IndieWire from David Ehrlich, and Blum sent it to Netflix and said, "Where's the Cam love?" And they upgraded us to an original after the fact.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden there was this announcement, Cam acquired out of Fantasia Festival by Netflix, and it's not quite what had actually happened. And then we were all of a sudden an original on the platform, and and then we started getting into all these other festivals, and then Sitges invited us in Fantastic Fest, and we had this great, kind of festival run at the end of that year, went up on Netflix, did incredibly well on the platform, and now I have people who come up to me and go, "I loved your movie at Sundance, man." And I'm like, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. It's not a Sundance film. Sundance has actually rejected every movie I've made twice.
So is it part of like your love of initial rejection of Showgirls and Speed Racer? You had this kind of very early rejection, and then boom.
I've still dealt. I've had a really hard time getting all 3 of my films into film festivals. It's been a real struggle. Yes, Faces too. Yeah. Couldn't get into a lot of places at a certain point, which I think is interesting. And I now at this point I don't care anymore. But when it's your first movie and you're desperately trying to kind of find an audience, it's terrifying. And so seeing that first screening, with my parents and Issa and all my friends was really special because I never thought I would actually be able to be a filmmaker. I never thought it would happen for me. I don't come from money. I have no family relationships in the film industry. I grew up in Colorado. I had a really hard time. I've never gotten any support from labs or, any of the things that are supposed to help you. My short films never got into any film festivals, It just seemed like there was no way for me to gain a foothold in the industry. And then, there were a few people that really believed in us, like Cooper, Samuel Sim, and Beasikara Blum, and, our producers, Adam and Greg, and then Mitch at Fantasia. I couldn't even get an agent after I made Cam. Wow. I couldn't get representation until after that fake Netflix sale.
And so I thought Eddington was one of the best films of the year.
Totally agree.
And I think it maybe is the content that initially is it's so new and it's hard for people to put it forward. I'm not sure what the answer is there, but
it's that Eddington, best movie of last year, I think. Also the most important movie of last year. I really loved it. I think that people. I find it really interesting. I was talking to somebody about this a couple of days ago, where they were just talking about how boring and uncomfortable it is to shoot people on their phones. And I'm like, if it's boring and uncomfortable to film, imagine what it's like to live it. You know what I mean? I think the fact that you have all these filmmakers that are I don't want to have to deal with phones because it makes the filmmaking and the storytelling hard. It's yes, it's also making living hard.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually our responsibility as filmmakers to dig into that. Yeah. You think about a movie like Taxi Driver, right? one of the all-timers. Taxi Driver is a movie that's like about 1970s New York, about the problems of 1970s New York. It's trying to get under the skin of them. It's so specific, it's universal. And I think something that I'm striving to do in my work is to also make movies that are so specific to like what's wrong with how we live now that like we can then still draw some universal ideas about it. Ultimately, I think the reason that people are resistant to Eddington is because it's forcing them to confront the fact that like we are living inside of a dystopia. It's here. Like the dystopian world is here. We are all going insane because we've traded over the fundamental basic packet of human communication to robots that we have no control over. You know, texting, email, these are video games. They're structured like video games. We're all playing video games in terms of how we just communicate. And that's really, really scary. And I think that Eddington is a movie that makes it and lays out a like unbelievably strong argument for why that is and for how social communication is breaking down. And I think that people just don't want to confront that. It's uncomfortable. But I promise you in 10 years, that is going to be like at least one of the 5 big movies of the 2020s.
And I think Faces of Death does the same thing, that reminds you that people are on the other end of all of this, that it is people with real consequences. Both these films will resonate more and more with people, and I think young people will definitely, they are living in Faces of Death more than some of these older filmmakers that may not have a understanding of Reddit, the horrors of Reddit.
Why don't we put Eddington as closing night?
All right, let's do it.
That's a good one. I think it's good because it's like, I think that's a movie that identifies. I love it. I love the genre elements of it. I love the contemporary elements of it. I love the ways in which also people have not wanted to confront what I think that movie's talking about. And I think Ari is not just a great filmmaker; he's a great producer. You know, I think he's really found a way. You know, he and Lars have found a way to really champion a lot of really exciting, boundary-pushing commercial cinema, and I think that they've done a really amazing job leveraging their, I think, moment into trying to keep the cinema not just alive, but growing and changing.
Let's do it. Closing night. Ari Aster's Eddington. All right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the 8. We have 1 slot remaining, the dream screening in Los Angeles. Do you have any favorite Los Angeles screening memories?
Well, I have a memory of one of the great regrets of my life, which is a serious American Cinematheque deep cut.
Okay.
Which is in 2012. I was living in LA. It was my first summer in LA, and I was living in Westwood. And so the Aero was very, very close as a theater. And there was a 7 p.m. screening of The Shining at the Aero. And I was like, I really want to see it. I've never seen it on film. But I was like, I was tired. I was just being lazy. And I didn't go see The Shining. And the next day, I see this news drop that after that screening of The Shining, somebody gets up and goes, hey, we have a special sneak preview of a new movie if anybody wants to hang around. So they clear out the theater, they wait for the next screening. Then Paul Thomas Anderson shows up, goes roll it, and does the first public screening ever of The Master. And I was sitting there just like kicking myself.
That's somebody.
Who?
That was me.
Really?
That was me.
I love that.
Wow, so you had a ticket, or you were going to go?
I had a ticket to The Shining. I didn't go. I missed The Master. One of my great regrets.
That was not programmed till that morning.
Wow.
Because we had been testing all of his 70 while he was printing it, and we were going and doing daytime tests. And that morning he was like, hey, do you just want to show it?
I love that.
Because he loves The Shining. And he was like, oh, this will tie in. We'll just do that.
Yeah.
And so no one called you, because we also at the beginning announced there's going to be something special after the screening, and people saw Paul walk around. So people were driving over like at 150 miles an hour to try to see. And that was my birthday.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that a weird?
I love that.
So that's your dream screening?
That's my dream screening. That's my dream screening. That's the one that got away.
That's the one that got away. Because you also got to see The Shining.
Exactly.
So let's go back. You had tickets. You were going to go.
I had a ticket to The Shining. I lived, I don't know, a 20-minute walk away from the Aero. Like, there's no excuse.
Yeah.
It's pure laziness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the one.
That was the one. If I could be at anyone, mostly because like I could have been at that one. You know, there's obviously other premieres, other crazy things.
But you had the ticket.
I had the ticket.
Now your film showed at the Aero where that happened.
100%. That was a big thing for me yesterday.
It was a healing process.
Exactly. We're getting there. We're getting there one day.
Well, amazing. So we're going to put The Master in 70.
Master in 70.
Is it The Shining, The Master then? Because you also missed it.
I did.
Did you just show up?
But I've since seen The Shining on 35. So
Okay.
I think it's, it would be that screening.
Yeah.
The Shining, The Master. That would be one of the all-time ones that got away. Yeah.
All right, here it is. The dream screening of The Shining, Secret, The Master. Okay, we have all 8 slots, still time. You could change something, you could add something. Are we set? Is there any film that you feel is missing that needs to go up on this board?
I'm thinking. I feel like there's literal room in the audience award and closing night section. So I'm like racking my brain because like I feel like there's definitely stuff missing. I mean one of my one movie that I do just wish there was room for here is World on a Wire, the Fassbinder movie, which also would have made a strong run for double feature just because I saw that at the Harvard Film Archive, in the 2 parts.
Lengthy.
With the 3.5. But I love that movie. I think what I love about that movie so much is it's a great sci-fi movie that is also a movie that's just like about how weird Berlin is and there's so many just like crazy big swing imaginative shots and ways of telling a story and all of it just kind of works. I have another good one. I have a really good audience award one.
Yeah. Right.
World premiere of Titan at Cannes.
Okay.
That was a movie that I went to Cannes in 2021, and it was this COVID Cannes. It was later. It was in July, and it was super small. It was like it played like a local film festival. You could get tickets to anything. Wow. You could even get into parties that normally couldn't be, because it just was like a half the size of normal. Yeah. And I'd never been to Cannes before. And what had happened is I had written How to Blow Up a Pipeline with Ariella and Jordan. We had just finished a draft of the script, and we were like, we got to raise money. And also I knew I had this small window of time where I felt that I could get the movie made and be the first one to have a film like this, because there were so many other eco-terrorist thriller movies that were happening. I was like, but like if I'm going to do this, I got to be the first. So last minute, Ariella and I flew to Cannes. We'd never been to the festival. My friend Jason Lester had, and was kind of showing us the ropes. And we were like, we're going to Cannes. We're raising the money for this movie. And we just started like breaking into parties that we did not have invites to and getting chased out of those parties. And at one of these parties, it was actually a party that I had snuck into. I ran into, actually Ariella met this guy, Alex Hughes, who, she was like, I think this guy might like the movie, and then staged a meet cute between me and Alex. And Alex was like, what are you doing at Cannes? I'm like, I'm making this movie. And I told him about it, and he was like, I'd love to do that with you. And that was how we started the process of making Pipeline. And then a few days later, I got to see the world premiere of Titan, and that was like a really special screening. And you could kind of tell something was happening there. And then it won the Palme d'Or. And I think that was kind of that was a bucket list for me. Yeah.
We're going to add that to the audience award?
To the audience award.
Okay, we're going to add that to the audience award. Titan. We can still swap, move things around. My Titan story was a Beyond Fest. We often would put on costumes back in the day. We were showing it at the American Legion, which are all these war veterans, and then we'd be dressed like a pumpkin. It would be very embarrassing. But I remember we were dressed as Mario Karts. And Julia was there watching us get on stage dressed as Mario Karts. And it was one of the more humiliating moments of my life. All right. So we are very close to the end. Is there anything you want to add, change to the Daniel Goldhaber Film Festival?
I think this is pretty good. I think this one's good. I think this is good. Yeah. I'm very happy with it. I feel like this is, these are, I think, most of these, I think a number of these are kind of like, a lot of my big epiphany moments of kind of, what kind of filmmaker I want to be, how I want to be a filmmaker. I think, yeah, this is where a lot of that inspiration came from.
You know what I love is you mentioned the movies, you mentioned the theaters. You're one of the first people to mention all the programmers and the archivists and everyone else who are behind that.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I'm friends with a lot of programmers and a lot of critics, because I think that, like, I don't know, from my standpoint, like, if we're going to have a healthy cinema, these are the people that keep it healthy. These are like, they allow the cinema to continue to grow, to continue to change. And also, it goes back to Stephen DeFore at Video Station. Like, if I didn't have a human person there saying, hey, I see who you are as a person, you know, I think that you should consider writing movies. Here's some movies that you might find interesting. I don't know if I'd be a filmmaker. And I think that that's the thing, is that film is about community. It's about people. And the biggest problem that I have with streaming is not that it's taking movies out of the cinema. That's sad, but movies have been out of the cinema since the 50s, since they went on television. So I think that the real threat of streaming is the lack of programming, the lack of, you know, somebody saying, hey, this is cool. I think you should check this out. And that kind of, you know, film as person-to-person connection. I ultimately I like critics the same way. I love people that want to kind of dig into a movie and figure out what it is. I love reading negative reviews of my own work. Sometimes it stings, but also I'm like, you know, like a real pan, like a passionate pan. I'm like, fuck yeah. Like, somebody hated something that I did. That's awesome. That's great. And I mean, like, I had an amazing Twitter interaction recently because Armand White, famous crank critic, amazing critic, because like, this is what I want from a critic. I want somebody with like the world's most iconoclastic like taste in film. And Armand hates How to Blow Up a Pipeline. I think he thinks this movie is evil. And around the One Battle After Another stuff, he started, you know, he was bringing up, you know, well, this movie sucks, and, you know, and How to Blow Up a Pipeline really sucks, and, you know, these are like evidence of, you know, the moral decay and rotten Hollywood, whatever. And I responded, and I was like, you know, I really appreciate that you're keeping our movie alive, Armin. Like, thank you for talking about it. Thank you for keeping it as a part of the critical discourse. And he was like, he responded too. He's like, anytime. Like, yeah. And it was actually like, we had like a very friendly conversation on Twitter about it. Like, I really mean it. I'm like, I'm really glad that movie got under his skin. At least, you know, that's good. He's thinking about it. He's talking about it. Like, I don't care that he doesn't like it. Like, that's the point. Like, is to put stuff out there and tell stories that like keep the culture moving and invigorated. And programmers and critics and archivists and people that throw screenings and people that put film festivals together, you know, and people like John Derringer, who's like, I'm going to start a little publication with just movie screenings, and like totally revitalized in a lot of ways. It was such a big part of this kind of new wave of New York repertory cinema. You know, this one small blog he launched, like, started dozens of careers. And like, these are the people that are precious to me, because they're the ones that keep the theatrical experience alive.
Bravo. I mean, amen. And it's still going. Cinema's not dying.
No.
It's happening because of all the people that you mentioned, and people like you and your team that's putting all this together. So we just need more Steves. We need a Steve slate.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Do you want to walk us through your amazing program?
Yeah, so we have City of Lost Children. We have The Dark Knight, probably, you know, one of the high watermarks of just what I want an audience to feel. Unfriended and Eraserhead. I think Unfriended is a movie that I think showed me how the internet could be cinematic, and I think Eraserhead is a movie that taught me to always try to make work as personal as it possibly can be. Werkmeister Harmonies, which is, I think, a movie that made me start to question the kind of, you know, director as singular auteur model of filmmaking. You know, and I also love the way that Bilatar talks about the fact that he made the movies that he made for the people that he made them with, and I think that's something that I really try to hold dear. We have the double feature of Showgirls and Speed Racer, I think two of the most propulsive and entertaining and fun and funny and campy movies that I've ever seen. We have Whiplash Whiplash and Titan. We've got the my kind of dream screening, the one that got away, which was the world premiere of the Master at the Aero Theater, double featured with The Shining, and then closing with Eddington, and I think a movie that is one of the best confrontations and I think explications of the way we live now. It's got an all-timer climax. I mean, I there's a moment where Joaquin Phoenix walks out of a building with a weapon that I laughed harder than I've laughed. There's a kind of boyish joy of like, how big can the gun get that you don't expect in a movie that's otherwise this intelligent about America, and I found that to just be the cat's pajamas. So yeah, that's I think a nice little, you know, representation of a lot of what I love in cinema. And while there could be 500 other movies on here, I think in a lot of ways these are movies that mean a tremendous amount to me and have shaped, really, at the end of the day, the filmmaker I want to be and the way that I would like my movies to be received.
It's an amazing festival. I would go to the cinema to see this. I just saw Faces of Death at the cinema last night. It's unbelievable. I'm excited for what you do next. And it's playing in theaters now, Faces of Death. Daniel, thank you so much for programming your festival.
Thank you so much for having me.
The American Cinematheque podcast is produced and edited by Victoria Alejandro. Mike Cuenca edits and produces our video. Stephanie Cervantes is our marketing manager. Our theme music is by Gelberg. And I'm your host, Grant Moniger. Thanks to everyone who makes this show possible. The American Cinematheque operates the Aero, Egyptian, and Los Feliz 3 theaters in Los Angeles with programming nationwide. The American Cinematheque is a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to hear more, donate, become a member, or program your own AC Podcast Film Festival, head over to AmericanCinematheque.com.